Above the Demon King's lair, the final battle between humanity and the forces of darkness had finally reached its end. On that brutal battlefield, Eftal, who was middle-aged at the time, stood beside his hero party. They risked their lives against the gigantic Demon King, a monster with overwhelming power, capable of crushing their entire formation with just one small mistake. But after countless coordinated attacks from his comrades, Eftal finally found the decisive opening. Gathering all of his mana, he unleashed an extremely powerful lightning spell, striking the Demon King directly. A massive bolt of lightning tore through the sky, shattering the darkness covering the battlefield and completely ending the Demon King's life. The long war between humanity and the demon race had finally come to a close. Peace was brought back by the hands of the heroes themselves. Not long after, in the royal capital, the king held a grand ceremony to honor those who had saved the world. Amid the cheers of the citizens and the admiring eyes of the crowd, the great mages representing the mighty elements were called forward one by one. Fire, earth, water, and wind. Each of them had devoted their power to the battle. Because of their sacrifice, the king decided to grant them the title of sovereign, a noble rank once reserved only for those of royal blood. And then came Eftal's turn, the mage who had used lightning to deliver the final blow. The king personally stepped forward, placed a crown upon his head, and granted him the title of the Thunder Sovereign. That moment brought Eftal to tears. After more than 40 years of devoting his entire life to magic, after so many years of fighting, researching, and pushing himself forward without rest, his efforts had finally been recognized by the world in the highest form possible. But that glory was not the end of Eftal's journey. Many years later, when his hair had turned completely white and old age had left its marks on his face, he became a teacher at a magic academy, continuing to pass his knowledge on to the next generation. Inside the classroom, Eftal guided his young students as they maintained a fourth-tier magic circle. He patiently observed every movement of their mana. He was strict, yet gentle, like someone who had lived long enough to understand that the foundation was the most important part of magic. Among those students was Merlin, a young girl who always looked at Eftal with admiration and a strong desire to go even further. After finishing her assignment, Merlin immediately begged her teacher to let her learn 6th-tier magic. She believed that if she became stronger, she could become his #1 disciple. That request reminded Eftal of the past. Many years ago, on a ruined battlefield, after a fierce clash, he had heard the cry of a newborn baby among the wreckage. That baby was Merlin. Even though he knew she carried the blood of the demon race, the sworn enemy of humanity, Eftal could not abandon such a fragile life. He carried her out of the battlefield, brought her home, and raised her as his own. Because of that, to Eftal, Merlin was not just his student. She was the child he had personally rescued from the darkness of war. He understood her potential better than anyone, but he also knew that power given too early could easily cause its user to lose control. Caring deeply for Merlin, Eftal gently refused her request to skip ahead. He told her to first master 4th-tier magic properly. Only when her foundation became strong enough could she reach higher levels without putting herself in danger. But Merlin was still just a young girl desperately wanting to prove herself. She did not want to remain protected by her teacher forever. Even more than that, she could not bear to watch the aging Eftal continue carrying every burden on his own. So, despite her teacher's warning, Merlin secretly took her staff and went alone into the Forbidden Forest. The only thought in her mind was that if she could defeat the monster inside the cave with her own hands, she would prove herself as the greatest disciple of the Thunder Sovereign. She believed that by becoming stronger and accomplishing something truly great, she could shoulder some of Eftal's heavy responsibilities, allowing the teacher she respected so deeply to finally rest with peace of mind. But the moment Merlin stepped into the depths of the forest, she encountered a gigantic magical beast in the form of a red wolf. Facing the terrifying pressure of the monster, Merlin immediately cast the 4th-tier magic she had just learned. However, her attack could not deal any meaningful damage. Only then did the young girl finally realize she had been far too confident. The enemy before her was not a monster a young student could handle alone, and everything she had prepared was nowhere near enough to save her life. The giant red wolf quickly chased after her. Fear threw Merlin's steps into chaos. While desperately trying to escape, she tripped and fell right in front of the beast's claws. Just as she was about to be killed, her teacher appeared. Seeing Merlin nearly lose her life because of her impatience, Eftal could not help but scold her in a stern voice. But even while reprimanding his student, he showed no fear toward the gigantic beast in front of him. With a single raise of his hand, Eftal calmly cast a 10th-tier magic spell. A brilliant light instantly exploded through the forest, destroying the monster so easily that Merlin could only stand there in stunned silence. To Merlin, that was the absolute power of the greatest teacher in the world. But to Eftal, this moment was a lesson he wanted her to remember. Impatience only creates fragile strength. And the more someone rushes toward the top, the easier it is to lose the foundation that matters most. After the incident in the Forbidden Forest, Merlin was brought back to the academy. She still felt guilty for disobeying her teacher, but deep inside, her worry for Eftel only grew stronger. The reason she had acted so recklessly was not simply to prove herself, it was because she had already noticed his declining health. When Merlin brought water to her teacher, she accidentally saw Eftel coughing up blood. That scene caused the anxiety she had been hiding to finally overflow. She admitted she knew Eftel's illness was getting worse, which was why she wanted to become strong as quickly as possible to take over his burdens. Hearing that, Eftel was no longer angry. He gently patted Merlin on the head and admitted he truly did not have much time left. That was why he wanted to use his remaining days to train talented successors, people who could continue walking farther down the path he had never been able to complete. Merlin immediately objected. In her eyes, Eftel was the Thunder Sovereign, the strongest man in the world, a mage who could cast 10th tier magic as easily as breathing. She could not accept the idea that he would see himself as someone with limits. But deep inside, Eftel understood the truth better than anyone. The title of Thunder Sovereign might make the world admire him, and the achievement of defeating the Demon King might make him a hero. But he had never been a true genius. Compared with brilliant young people like the Flame Sovereign, prodigies who naturally reach the peak through their inborn talent, Eftel understood that he was only someone who had been forced to struggle desperately. He had to work tens or even hundreds of times harder than others just to stand on that battlefield. Just as the atmosphere between teacher and student became heavy, a student rushed into the room with shocking news. The Flame Sovereign had finally completed the theory behind the magical aptitude testing solution, a study that had long been considered impossible. The news immediately caught Eftel's attention. If this theory was real, humanity would finally be able to measure a person's magical aptitude through a clear method, instead of relying only on instinct or battle achievements. Without hesitation, Eftel began preparing the testing solution. The testing method itself was highly unusual. All they had to do was take one strand of hair from the subject, then place it into 4 test tubes filled with magical water corresponding to the 4 elements: fire, earth, water, and wind. Based on the light and color reaction inside each test tube, a person's aptitude could be evaluated by rank, from E as the lowest to S as the highest. Merlin was the first to be tested, and her results shocked everyone. Her aptitude for water and wind both reached rank S, her earth aptitude reached rank B, and even her fire aptitude reached rank C, an incredible result for such a young student. Those numbers proved what Eftel had always believed. Merlin truly was a child with extraordinary potential. As long as she was trained properly, she could reach a realm that even Eftel's generation might never touch. But immediately after, the excitement of the students turned toward Eftel himself. Everyone wanted to know just how terrifying the magical aptitude of one of the 4 sovereigns would be. In their eyes, the Thunder Sovereign would surely produce results far beyond everyone else. Eftel hesitated at first, but in the end, he agreed to take the test because he wanted the answer too. Even though he had lived his entire life alongside magic, and even though he had fought to the very end to be recognized, he had always wondered whether he possessed even the smallest trace of natural talent. He understood he could not reach the peak of magic by walking the path of a genius, but after more than 40 years of endless effort, a tiny hope still remained in Eftel's heart. Perhaps he was not completely empty after all. But when Eftel's hair was dropped into the 4 test tubes, no light appeared, no color changed. All 4 test tubes remained transparent and silent in a way that felt almost cruel. In that moment, the entire room sank into complete silence. Eftel could only stare at the result before him, the result that denied the final hope he had secretly kept inside his heart. Then, the shocked voice of a student rang out as he read from the theory paper, colorless and transparent, meaning no aptitude. That single sentence pierced straight into the heart of the Thunder Sovereign. The man who had once saved the world, defeated the Demon King, and been honored as one of the 4 sovereigns, had finally discovered that he had absolutely no magical aptitude. The bitterness of that truth was overwhelming. The glory of Eftel's entire life had not come from talent, but from the desperate effort of a man who had never been blessed by heaven. And that cruel truth would lead directly to the regret of his final days, driving his decision to reincarnate in order to challenge the peak of magic once again. Many days later, Eftel lay bedridden during the final days of his life. His body had completely weakened and his breathing grew faint. But in those aged eyes, the regret he carried never disappeared. Even though the world praised him as a hero, Eftel could not leave this life in peace. What he held in his final moments was not satisfaction, but the resentment of a mage who had never reached the true peak of magic. Tears fell from his eyes as he kept repeating that he could not accept it. He could not accept that a lifetime of effort still could not surpass natural talent. He could not accept that after sacrificing everything, he was still held back by his own limits, running out of time before he could take one more step toward his dream. And then, the Thunder Sovereign Eftel passed away. But his soul did not completely disappear. Thanks to a hidden skill called Reincarnation cycle, which he had obtained 50 years earlier, Eftel opened his eyes inside an undefined space. There, a goddess was waiting to guide him into a new life. The goddess acknowledged Eftel's unbelievably persistent will, a soul rejected by talent itself, a soul that had died with regret, yet still refused to let go of the desire to reach the peak. She told him that he would be reincarnated once more. This would become his third life, a new chance to begin again and chase the dream he had left unfinished. Not only that, the goddess also planned to grant him special abilities, such as the power to double his growth speed to make his new life easier. But Eftal smiled and refused. To him, the most important thing was not a privilege, a reward, or a shortcut to becoming a genius. He said that all the magical knowledge he had accumulated throughout his life was already inside his mind. What he truly needed now was only time. As long as he had enough time, Eftal would continue researching, training, and moving forward with his own hands, just as he had always done. After making his agreement with the goddess, Eftal woke up in the body of a 4-year-old boy. This time, he was born into a peaceful family, with a gentle mother who loved him dearly. At first, his memories were still unclear, but when he ran to the mirror and saw the young face reflected before him, every memory of his life as the Thunder Sovereign came flooding back. The battle against the Demon King, the royal ceremony, the Magic Academy, Merlin, and the bitter moment he learned he had no aptitude. Eftal understood that he had truly reincarnated, and the chance he had once longed for was finally right in front of him. But even after beginning a new life, the obsession with aptitude never disappeared. The first thing Eftal did was recreate the magical aptitude testing solution with his own hands to test his current body. On the quiet grass field, he dropped his own strand of hair into the 4 test tubes, still holding a small hope in his heart. Perhaps in this new life, fate would give him a different result. But reality did not change. All 4 test tubes remained transparent. They did not shine, they did not change color, and not a single magical reaction appeared. That meant even after reincarnation, Eftal was still colorless, still someone without any natural magical aptitude. He lay back on the grass and quietly looked up at the sky. A faint uneasiness rose inside his heart. If he still had no talent, would this life simply repeat the same tragedy? Even if he had been given more time, would he still be stopped by the wall of genius once again? But before Eftal could sink deeper into those thoughts, the sky above the royal capital suddenly turned dark. A gigantic dragon with glowing red eyes appeared. Its wings covered the sky, and the terrifying aura pouring from its body threw the entire area into chaos. The knights on horseback quickly realized that the difference in power was far too great. They had no chance of fighting such a monster, so their formation instantly broke apart as they turned and fled in panic. At first, Eftal also thought that a 4-year-old child like him could not possibly do anything. His current body was far too small, and his mana should not have been enough to stand against a gigantic dragon. But in the next moment, his eyes changed. Even though his current body was only that of a child, inside Eftal still lived the soul of the Thunder Sovereign. The man who had defeated the Demon King spent his entire life researching magic and created original spells with his own hands. He decided to try using the original magic from his previous life. A gigantic green magic circle instantly appeared in the sky. Mana gathered violently in a single moment, and a destructive bolt of lightning shot straight toward the dragon. The 10th tier spell struck so fast that no one could react. The gigantic dragon, which had just thrown the entire royal capital into fear, was instantly blasted down from the sky. Everyone who witnessed the scene was left speechless. Right before their eyes, a 4-year-old child had destroyed a dragon with a single spell. As for Eftal, he quietly looked down at his small hands, then smiled in complete astonishment. Only now did he realize the most important truth. Even though he had reincarnated into the body of a child, he still retained all of the magical power he had possessed at the peak of his previous life. In other words, Eftal had not only carried over his memories and knowledge, he had also carried the mana, techniques, and battle experience of the Thunder Sovereign into this new era. Even though he was still colorless, and even though he still had no natural talent, this time, Eftal was no longer starting from zero. And at that moment, the next life of the Thunder Sovereign truly began. The man once rejected by talent would now use all the knowledge, experience, and power he had accumulated from the past to walk once again on the path toward the peak of magic. 3 years had passed since Eftal awakened the memories of his reincarnation. The young boy had gradually grown used to his new life, and after quietly investigating his surroundings, Eftal finally confirmed an important truth. This world was 400 years after the era he had once lived in. In other words, the achievements of the Thunder God Sovereign had long since become distant legends, and Eftal himself had been reborn as a child who was treated like an unwanted burden by his own descendants. At this time, the person who often visited Eftal and his mother was Frazier, his older half-brother. Every month, Frazier quietly brought them living expenses, allowing Eftal and his mother to continue surviving in this remote land. Through Eftal's narration, the truth about his family background was slowly revealed. His father was an important figure in the Azure Kingdom. Not only that, he was also a descendant of the Thunder God Sovereign. In other words, he was a descendant of Eftal's previous self. On paper, that sounded like being born into an incredible bloodline. But the problem was that Eftal's mother had no magic aptitude, and in a society that worshipped magic, that alone was enough for her to be looked down on. The lawful wife of the family did not respect her. The other people in the household did not treat her with dignity either. In the end, Eftel and his mother were pushed out to this isolated place, forced to live like outsiders within their own family. Eftel had never even been acknowledged by his biological father. He had never met the man in person. The irony was almost cruel. That family proudly claimed to carry the blood of the Thunder God Sovereign, while the real Thunder God Sovereign himself had been pushed aside and forgotten. Fraser, however, was different. He was the second son of the official wife of Duke Alcott, but he did not join the rest of the family in hating Eftel and his mother. Instead, he quietly looked after them. He helped them with money, and he also cared about the future of his younger brother. When Eftel said that he wanted to attend the Magic Academy in the Imperial capital one day, his mother immediately burst into tears. In her eyes, that path had already been blocked from the very beginning. The reason was simple. The magic testing system of this era had already concluded that Eftel had no aptitude, just like his mother. For an ordinary person, that result was almost a death sentence for the dream of becoming a mage. And it was even worse for Eftel, because he had been born into a family that believed magic was everything. Because of that, both his mother and Fraser wanted him to change direction and focus on swordsmanship instead. Fraser even advised him that if he entered the Officer Academy, he could still have a very good future. Fraser himself had once graduated at the top of the Officer Academy, so he understood the current military system very well. At the moment, the army greatly valued magic swordsmen. These were fighters who could use swords in battle while also supporting themselves with mana on the battlefield. But for Eftel, that was not the path he truly wanted. During outdoor training sessions, Fraser personally taught Eftel swordsmanship and military knowledge, and just as expected, Eftel learned extremely quickly. His talent for swordsmanship was also very good. If he chose this path, his future would definitely not be bad. However, the more they trained, the more Fraser noticed one problem. Eftel's movements always had a slight excess to them. It was not because he was bad with the sword, it was because his heart had never truly been placed into the blade. Even though his current body was only that of a child, inside Eftel still lived the soul of a great sage who had spent his entire life pursuing the path of magic. How could someone like that obediently give up on magic just because a few test tubes said he had no talent? So when Fraser once again said that Eftel was not suited for the path of magic, Eftel rejected the idea directly. He wanted to enter the Magic Academy. He wanted to continue the path of the great sage. He wanted to walk forward on the dream that had been left unfinished in his previous life. And then, Eftel said something that began to shake the logic of this entire era. It was true that he had no aptitude, but that did not mean he had no mana, and it definitely did not mean he could not use magic. To Eftel, the Magic Academy was not only a school, it was also the one place that might contain clues about why magic had become so strange after 400 years. And more importantly, it might help him understand how someone without aptitude could break past their own limits. Seeing that his stubborn younger brother would not give up, Fraser decided to set one condition. If Eftel could recreate even a part of the magic Fraser was about to cast, Fraser would personally write him a recommendation letter to enter the Magic Academy. After saying that, Fraser raised his hand seriously and began chanting. He called upon the wind spirit Sylphie. Then he released a sharp blade of wind that sliced through the base of a tree in front of them. For people of this era, that was probably a very solid display of magic, but in Eftel's eyes, its weakness was painfully obvious. The very act of chanting had already slowed down the casting speed far too much. When it was Eftel's turn, he did not even open his mouth to chant. He simply controlled his mana lightly. In the next instant, a massive pressure of wind erupted. It did not merely cut through the tree, it blasted the entire thing out of the ground. Fraser froze where he stood, because what Eftel had just used was not an ordinary technique. It was chantless casting, a method of using magic without reciting an incantation. In the current era, only sages who had trained for decades could even hope to reach that level. And yet, the child standing in front of him had done it as casually as brushing dust off his sleeve. Realizing that he had gone a little too far, Eftel quickly tried to cover it up. He claimed that he had accidentally used 4th-tier magic, but that only shocked Fraser even more. By the standards of this era, 4th-tier magic was already considered extremely advanced. To Eftel, however, 4th-tier magic was only basic magic from 400 years ago. Then before he could properly stop himself, Eftel accidentally revealed that he could even use 10th-tier magic. This time, Fraser's mind completely shut down. He fainted on the spot. The reason was easy to understand. In the current era, 10th-tier magic had already been classified as a lost technique. It almost existed only in books and legends. While Fraser was unconscious, Eftel took the opportunity to check the books again, and the truth only made him more certain. The magical civilization of this world had declined severely. Spells that had once been considered low-level in his era were now treated as advanced magic. Chantless casting, which had once been a basic foundation for practical battle mages, had become a luxury that even sages needed decades of harsh training to achieve. Eftel understood that if he continued revealing his abilities so carelessly, people might begin to suspect the truth of his reincarnation, so he immediately chose to hide his real strength. When Fraser woke up, Eftel casually redirected the story. He said that Fraser's magic had been so powerful that the tree had flown back and hit him in the head, causing him to faint. It was a rough excuse, but under the circumstances, with Fraser still recovering from the shock, it somehow worked. After that incident, Eftel decided to temporarily follow the military path that everyone expected from him. As for his research into magic, he would continue that in secret. To put it simply, on the surface, he would study the field chosen by his family. But behind the scenes, he would quietly keep chasing his true passion. Even though Eftel had temporarily moved away from the Magic Academy, his competitive nature had not disappeared at all. Especially under the influence of the indomitable skill from his previous life, he began setting a new goal for himself. If he had to learn the sword, then he would become the strongest magic swordsman. In order to test Eftel's true ability, Fraser invited Mariah. Mariah was the former captain of the Knight Order of the Azure Kingdom. He was the kind of man whose presence alone could change the atmosphere. The moment the match began, Eftel immediately felt the difference. Mariah's killing intent, speed, experience, and pressure were all far beyond what any ordinary child could endure. Forced into a difficult position, Eftel had no choice but to use physical enhancement to keep up with his opponent's movements. At that moment, Fraser also explained something to Mariah. The terrifying part about Eftel was not the magic aptitude recognized by the system, it was how smoothly he could control the mana inside his body. The way he circulated mana was so fluid that it looked like the work of a seasoned warrior. But Eftel himself understood the truth very well. This was not some natural talent. It was the experience of a great sage who had spent an entire lifetime controlling mana. Even so, in pure swordsmanship, Eftel was still overwhelmed by Mariah. Mariah saw through his weaknesses very quickly. His body was still too small. He did not have enough height, his muscles lacked strength, and his technique was not yet polished enough to face Mariah seriously. If Eftel wanted to truly fight him, he would need at least 3 more years. But Eftel was not the kind of person who would accept defeat just because of physical disadvantages. In the moment he was pushed into a corner, he did not use magic. He also did not try to clash against Mariah's sword with brute strength. Instead, he suddenly used a physical technique from his previous life. He borrowed the force of his opponent and threw Mariah to the ground. It was a clean shoulder throw, so clean that even Mariah had to admit defeat in the test. Only then did Fraser reveal Mariah's true identity. He was not only the former captain of the Knight Order, he was also the headmaster of the Azure Kingdom Officer Academy. In other words, by making Mariah acknowledge him, Eftel had officially secured a place at the Officer Academy once he turned 15. Time continued to pass. Eftel was now 14 years old. Only 1 year remained before he would reach adulthood in this world. Although he was outwardly following the military path, he had never abandoned magic. On stormy days, Eftel quietly tested 10th tier lightning magic again. This was the very power that had once earned him the title of Thunder God Sovereign in his previous life. However, these experiments also helped him discover a new problem. When casting 9th tier and 10th tier magic, there was always a slight delay before the spell actually activated. For someone else, that might have seemed like a minor detail. But for Eftel, a mage who had once lived and died on the battlefield, that delay could become a fatal weakness. He also understood that without an attribute, deeper research into magic in this world would be extremely difficult. Because of that, Eftel's true plan had not changed. Once he turned 15, he would leave home and go to the Magic Academy by himself. Just then, Fraser brought him new information. Eftel's biological father had finally agreed to meet him. When Eftel's mother heard the news, she cried from emotion. She believed that all the years her son had spent working hard in military training had finally helped him gain recognition from the family. Eftel, however, understood very clearly that this meeting meant nothing to him. Even so, he decided to go along. He did not want to disappoint his mother and Fraser. At the Alcott mansion, the man known as Eftel's father appeared with a cold and merciless attitude. Duke Alcott had no intention of acknowledging him as his son. He even denied their father-son relationship outright. In his eyes, Eftel was nothing more than a disgrace to the family. A child who carried the blood of the Thunder God Sovereign, yet had no magic aptitude at all. Inside that very room, Eftel saw the portrait of the Thunder God Sovereign hanging on the wall, and the person in the portrait was none other than Eftel's own appearance from his previous life. The scene was almost painfully ironic. The entire family bowed their heads in worship before the image of the Thunder God Sovereign, but when the original Thunder God Sovereign stood right in front of them, they dismissed him as defective simply because his aptitude test showed nothing. The true purpose of the meeting was soon revealed. Duke Alcott had not called Eftel there to recognize him. He had called him there to announce that from that point onward, the family would cut off all financial support for Eftel and his mother. The reason he gave was simple. Eftel had already secured a special admission slot at the Officer Academy. The academy provided free food and lodging. From the 3rd year onward, it even paid a salary. Therefore, the family no longer needed to spend money on him. For Eftel's mother, who had barely survived on that small allowance, this was like a direct strike against her only lifeline. But for Eftel, the matter did not end there. Duke Alcott then called in another one of his sons, Joachim. He ordered Joachim to test Eftal's strength, using the excuse of making sure Eftal would not disgrace the family after entering the officer academy. The moment Joachim stepped forward, he did not even bother hiding his hostility. He called the test something no different from training a dog. His eyes and killing intent made it clear that this was not a simple examination. Eftal immediately understood. This meeting had never been about recognition. It had never been about family. From the very beginning, it had been a trap disguised as a test, and Joachim was the one brought out to crush him in front of the entire family. The duel at the Alcott mansion begins with Fraser's worried warning. He tells Eftal that Joachim was once a master swordsman with rare achievements back in his school days, and that if things looked dangerous, Eftal should surrender immediately. But the problem is that the soul inside that 7-year-old boy is the Thunder God Emperor, who once stood against the Demon King. So this warning feels strangely reversed from the very beginning. Joachim has no idea who he is about to face. He throws Eftal a specially hardened wooden sword and threatens to break his bones and crush his skull. But what truly angers Eftal is not the sword. It is the insults aimed directly at Iria. Joachim calls her a pig and speaks crudely about how she was once favored. And in that moment, the Grand Sage's soul reaches its limit. Insulting a mother in front of her son is already dangerous, but doing it in front of a son who was once the Thunder God Emperor is basically choosing the fastest route to destruction. The moment Joachim charges forward, Eftal immediately activates physical enhancement. With terrifying speed, he closes the distance and calmly judges that Joachim's title as a master swordsman must have been nothing more than decoration, because his sword is slow and full of openings. With a single direct strike, Eftal breaks Joachim's wooden sword and sends him flying away, knocking him unconscious on the spot, right before the stunned eyes of Fraser, who had just finished warning his little brother to be careful. Eftal lowers his sword and stands before Joachim, who is lying on the ground like discarded trash, then coldly warns him that if he ever dares to insult his mother again, things will not end with a simple knockout. After that, he turns back and gently reassures Iria, as if nothing serious has happened. Before leaving, he even bows politely and thanks Duke Alcott for inviting them over, a scene where Eftal defeats his opponent while still keeping perfect manners, leaving the Duke trembling and sweating, barely managing to growl that Eftal must do his best at the Officer Academy to preserve what little dignity remains. 2 weeks after that shocking duel, life for Eftal and his mother unexpectedly returns to peace. During dinner with his favorite pie made by Iria, Eftal thinks that the Alcott family will surely try to take revenge after Joachim's humiliating defeat, but all of his predictions vanish when urgent knocking echoes through the evening. Iria opens the door and freezes at the sight before her. A strong mustached man is supporting Fraser into the house. Fraser is badly wounded and exhausted, yet he is still tightly holding a sleeping infant in his arms, weakly apologizing for startling them. The story quickly shifts to the royal palace of the Azure Kingdom, where the situation has become extremely dangerous. The Holy Knight Order and the Azure Army have taken nearly all elite forces on a grand expedition, leaving the royal guards protecting the capital so badly understaffed that even unfinished Officer Academy students have to be mobilized for guard duty. The house has been left wide open and the enemy seems to know it. At the same time, Fraser tells Mariah about shocking intelligence. The Grand Minister's faction is planning to use the expedition as an opportunity to assassinate the Crown Prince. But before they can even discuss a counterplan, a soldier rushes in and reports that the southern barbarians have invaded the royal capital. From the palace window, smoke and fire rise into the sky, and Fraser urgently calls for the prince to be taken somewhere safe. After safely bringing the newborn Crown Prince into the house, Fraser weakly reveals the whole political mess burning through the Azure Kingdom. The current king is actually the younger brother, far more talented than the elder brother who now serves as Grand Minister. But because the king has no heir, the throne would naturally pass to the Crown Prince, who is the legitimate son of that very Grand Minister. And the birth of this baby has turned the elder brother's faction into a nest of furious hornets, instantly triggering an assassination plot to seize power back. After hearing this, Eftal does not need any complicated reasoning. He immediately realizes that the person behind the attack is none other than his own father, Duke Alcott. Because on this board of power, the Duke is the one who would suffer most if the succession changes. The same man who normally treats his own son like worthless trash is now willing to burn an entire forest and kill a baby for political gain. Instead of returning to the royal capital sinking into chaos, Eftal decides to go with his brother and Mariah to escort the Crown Prince across the border to the main army's encampment, because that is the only place that can protect the baby from the Duke faction. Iria is so worried that she breaks into tears, but Eftal gently reassures her, while deep inside, the Thunder God Emperor from 400 years ago has already awakened. He says he has a duty to protect this country, just as he did in his previous life. Only this time, he does not need to wait for the Demon King to appear. But the journey through Neil Forest quickly turns into a death trap. The entire forest suddenly falls into an eerie silence, without birdsong or wind. Then from the darkness, soldiers from the Alcott family's mage corps reveal themselves and surround the whole group, and they do not stop there. They also set the forest on fire to cut off every escape route, as if they have already prepared the perfect stage for the heroes to die. When Fraser realizes that the group is trapped between fire behind them and the mage corps in front of them, he refuses to give up. He steps out from hiding alone to persuade his father, raising both hands to show that he is unarmed. Fraser begs Duke Alcott to stop everything and settle this through dialogue. But in response to his son's sincerity, the Duke shows no warmth at all. He coldly declares that Fraser is the very thing standing in his way, then orders his men to release their mana, striking Fraser with a bolt of lightning that makes him collapse unconscious on the spot. After witnessing that moment, Eftal no longer holds anything back. He steps forward with ice-cold eyes and says simply that he will show them what real magic is. In that instant, mana erupts violently from Eftal's body, shaking the very ground beneath him. He casts a spell that this era would never dare believe could exist, and in a single flash, the entire burning forest is frozen solid. The flames, the trees, and even the soldiers charging toward him are turned into massive statues of ice. The scale of his magic is so overwhelming that even Duke Alcott, watching from a distance, can only stare with his mouth open in terror, unable to understand how the child he abandoned for years could unleash power that far exceeds every standard of this world. As for Eftal, he stands calmly in the frozen forest as if he has only completed a warm-up exercise, and this is merely the opening act before he makes his birth father understand that the Thunder God Emperor, the legendary figure the Alcott family worships day and night, has actually been living under their own roof for the past 7 years. They were simply too obsessed with measuring talent through test tubes to notice. In the middle of the vast frozen lake he created, Eftal faces the entire Alcott mage corps with a cold expression, looking at them as if they are a group of troublesome students. He mocks them by saying that water magic is not even his specialty, but even so, none of them can scratch a single hair on his head. Hearing this, Duke Alcott turns red with fury and orders a full-scale attack. His pride has already been crushed, yet he still has no idea who he is standing against. The entire corps unleashes level 5 explosive arrows at once, and a massive blast swallows Eftal's position while the Duke watches with triumph in his eyes. But when the smoke clears, Eftal is still standing motionless like a stone statue surrounded by countless shining defensive magic circles. He has not even bothered to move, while the mages begin to stammer in disbelief because their strongest direct attack has done absolutely nothing to a boy who is not even of age. Driven mad by the disadvantage, Duke Alcott shouts and orders them to use the trump card he believes to be invincible, the level 6 focused Thunderburst, a spell with a grand name that shoots straight toward Eftal. But the only response is Eftal's tired sigh and his blunt criticism that this era gives its techniques impressive names while the spells themselves are ordinary. He casually raises his hand and forms a special level 7 magic shield, erasing the pathetic attack in an instant. The whole corps screams and calls him a monster. And in their eyes, he is even more terrifying than a monster because at least monsters usually have weaknesses. Eftal does not stop there. He draws his sword and charges straight into the enemy formation, using the very close combat techniques Fraser taught him to defeat mage after mage with ease. When one of them desperately tries to cast the level 2 riot bomb, Eftal instantly closes in, shuts him down, and knocks him away like trash, while mocking them by saying their real combat ability is worse than the elementary students of his old era. A brutal statement, but completely accurate, because in the age of the Thunder God Emperor, level 2 magic was little more than a morning warm-up. Deciding to end the joke, Eftal summons a gigantic blue magic circle that covers the sky. The foolish mages assume that he is trying to control the weather or create static electricity like their minor tricks, but Eftal only smiles and declares with overwhelming force that what he controls is lightning. Then a level 10 pillar of thunder descends from the heavens, destroying the core formation in an instant, leaving nothing but ashes scattered across the ice. Duke Alcott and one surviving subordinate are only alive because Eftal deliberately held back and created a protective barrier around them. The Duke still stubbornly threatens him with the crime of resisting the national army, but Eftal coldly replies that this is a failed assassination attempt against the crown prince, and eliminating the mastermind is an act of protecting the country. He looks down on his own father, a man willing to kill his children for power, and officially ends the coup with a sentence of public hanging for both the Duke and Joachim, a fitting end for those who dared to target the crown prince and insult the mother of the Thunder God Emperor. After everything, Eftal meets Fraser again in town. His older brother has miraculously survived thanks to the family heirloom necklace, Oberon's Guardian, which blocked the fatal blow. The two brothers embrace with joy and relief that the other is safe, and thanks to Fraser's desperate efforts to save the crown prince, the Alcott family is not stripped of its title, while Fraser officially becomes the heir, a beautiful outcome for the rare older brother who chose justice inside a family filled with schemes. In a quiet forest, Eftal stands with Fraser and Mariah as he cleans up the battlefield using level 7 spells such such as evil flame and wild wind. Only then do they truly realize the terrifying power he has been hiding all this time. Eftel apologizes, but of course he cannot reveal the truth about his reincarnation. Mariah understands and chooses to keep the secret, warning him never to use that power in front of outsiders in order to avoid throwing the world into chaos. But despite everything, Eftel remains firm in his single goal. He wants to enter the Magic Academy, continue his research, and reach the peak of magic that his previous life left unfinished. Mariah agrees to train his body and swordsmanship until he turns 15, while Eftel smiles brightly with hope, because at last, the path toward mastering magic in his new life has truly opened before him. Eftel has finally turned 15, the age when he is allowed to choose his own path. That morning, Iria struggles to remain composed as she prepares to send her son away from home. She tells him that he is now old enough to pursue the life he truly wants, but no matter how tired or discouraged he becomes, this house will always be waiting for him. Eftel embraces his mother and thanks her for raising him over the past 15 years. He asks everyone to take care of themselves, while Mariah tries to hide his tears by claiming that dust has blown into his eyes. Even in the middle of an emotional farewell, the old swordsman still reminds Eftel not to neglect his training. Eftel bows deeply to all three of them and begins his journey. Behind him stands the home where he grew up. Ahead lies a future shaped entirely by his own decisions. This time, Eftel is determined to overcome the limits of natural talent and reach the summit of magic that remained beyond him in his previous life. On the road toward the city, hosting the Magic Academy entrance examination, Eftel stops at a small camp to rest. The moment he sits down, he hears an argument at the neighboring table. An elderly mage in his 50s is kneeling before Edworth the Raging Flame, an A-rank adventurer invited to the nearby town. The old man teaches magic to local children and politely asks Edworth to spare a little time to guide them. Edworth cuts him off before he can finish. He proudly announces that he reached A-rank at only 20 years old, while the old man has spent more than half his life as nothing more than a C-rank mage. To Edworth, someone who has devoted his life to teaching rural children is not even worthy of speaking to him as an equal. A small amount of fame has already convinced him that everyone else exists beneath his feet. The old mage swallows his pride, apologizes, and invites him to the town's welcoming feast. Edworth becomes even more offended, claiming that his time is far too valuable for such people. He then pulls on the chain connected to the collar of a red-haired demon girl standing beside him. A slave mark created by Edworth is engraved upon her body, and he proudly declares that once the mark is complete, he will be able to force mana into it and command her to obey every order. He speaks as though cruelty were some magnificent achievement. The surrounding people clearly despise what they are seeing, but none of them dares challenge an A-rank adventurer. The sight reminds Eftel of Merlin, the demon girl he once rescued from a battlefield and raised as both a student and a member of his family. Had he ignored her cries beneath the ruins all those centuries ago, Merlin might also have been reduced to property and passed between cruel masters. The thought fills him with disgust. Even so, Eftel forces himself to remain patient. The slave mark has not fully stabilized, and destroying it carelessly could disrupt the magical structure and harm the person carrying it. At that moment, screams erupt outside. A gigantic orc charges into the camp, smashing merchandise and sending civilians running in every direction. No adventurer in the area appears strong enough to face it, so the elderly mage immediately introduces Edworth. The moment the crowd hears that he is A-rank, panic gives way to hope. Every terrified face turns toward him as though their savior has already arrived. The attention only feeds Edworth's arrogance. He declares that an ordinary giant orc is merely a B-rank monster, and therefore unworthy of serious effort from the famous Raging Flame. Before attacking, he even tells the villagers to watch carefully, since people from a remote place like this rarely receive the privilege of witnessing true magic. Edworth casts the 4th tier spell Divine Flame, covering the orc's entire body in fire. The crowd begins cheering, certain that the battle has already ended. Then the smoke clears. The monster is still standing, almost completely unharmed. Eftel immediately realizes that this is no ordinary giant orc. It is a berserk orc, the strongest known variant of its species, with defenses powerful enough to withstand 4th tier magic. Edworth reaches the same conclusion and understands that he cannot defeat it. Instead of protecting the civilians who place their trust in him, Edworth creates a barrier around the entire crowd, trapping them inside with the berserk orc. He remains safely outside and prepares to escape. With breathtaking shamelessness, he declares that someone as important as him cannot be allowed to die in an insignificant countryside camp. The villagers who praised him moments earlier will have to serve as bait while he runs. The people desperately strike the barrier, but none of them can break through. Behind them, the orc slowly turns in their direction. In a matter of seconds, the celebrated hero reveals himself as a coward, willing to exchange dozens of lives for a few extra moments of safety. Children scream, adults shield their families, and Edworth continues walking away as though every person behind him is worth less than a single step of his own. Eftel immediately casts the 6th tier spell Gospel of the Supreme Angel without chanting. the barrier shatters into countless fragments, freeing the civilians before the orc can attack. Edworth freezes in disbelief. A teenage boy has destroyed his magic in an instant, and Eftel has also used chantless casting, a technique that even the sages of this era may spend decades trying to master. Realizing that he has already attracted too much attention, Eftel searches for a way to defeat the orc without revealing anything more. His goal is to enter the examination as an ordinary applicant, not arrive in the city after becoming the subject of every rumor in the region. Eftel decides to fire the 3rd-tier spell, Flame Strike, in public, while secretly layering a 9th-tier spell beneath it. Everyone will believe the orc was defeated by ordinary 3rd-tier magic, while the hidden spell performs the real work. Unfortunately, the plan never reaches its 2nd stage. The moment Flame Strike touches the berserk orc, the monster is completely incinerated. Edworth and the villagers stare in silence. Even Eftel is surprised. The spell he intended to use as camouflage has somehow completed the job of the 9th-tier attack by itself. Edworth nearly falls over from shock. The elderly mage examines what happened and explains that although Eftel cast only a 3rd-tier spell, the mana was compressed with extraordinary precision, and the magical structure contained almost no imperfections. Its actual destructive power was therefore comparable to a 5th-tier spell. Only then does Eftel fully understand how severely magical control has declined during the past 400 years. A technique considered basic in his former era is now enough to astonish everyone present. He suspects that even 1st-tier magic might have defeated the orc if used properly. Still hoping to avoid attention, Eftel claims that he merely got lucky and struck a weak point. It is a modest explanation, but not a particularly convincing one, after everyone just watched him destroy an A-rank adventurer's barrier and eliminate a powerful monster with one attack. Before leaving, Eftel turns toward Edworth and orders him to learn some basic respect. He points out that the elderly C-rank mage understands magic far better than Edworth does. More importantly, trapping civilians with a monster and using them as bait constitutes attempted murder. The fact that Eftel prevented the deaths does not erase the crime. A man willing to sacrifice innocent people has no right to control the life of another person. Eftel commands Edworth to release the demon girl and surrender himself to the authorities. His A-rank title can no longer protect his pride. One cold look from Eftel is enough to make the man who mocked everyone around him lower his head and obey. Edworth no longer possesses the courage to resist and agrees to every demand. For the first time, a trace of hope appears in the red-haired girl's eyes. Once Eftel confirms that the civilians are safe, he resumes his journey toward the city. However, even after traveling a considerable distance, he realizes that the demon girl is quietly following him. Whether he increases his speed or changes direction, her red hair remains visible somewhere behind him. She keeps enough distance to avoid disturbing him, yet never allows him to disappear completely, as though she is terrified of being abandoned but equally afraid of approaching. Eftel finally turns around and asks how long she intends to follow him. The girl immediately drops to her knees and begs him to become her new master. Eftel is left speechless. He has just freed her from one chain, and now she is voluntarily asking to enter another. Through tears, she explains that the slave mark has not completely disappeared. If she continues wandering alone, another cruel person could establish a new contract and force her to obey. Attempting to resist such a contract might even kill her. From her perspective, choosing someone powerful and trustworthy is safer than waiting for another monster like Edworth to claim her. When Eftel asks about her identity, she explains that her ancestors were defeated in an ancient war against humanity. Their entire family was enslaved, and that status continued across generation after generation. She is a descendant of demon royalty and a distant relative of Merlin, one of the greatest mages in the demon realm. The name Merlin brings memories from 400 years earlier rushing back. Eftel remembers the young girl he once adopted, the student who constantly begged him to teach her advanced magic and recklessly entered a forbidden forest because she wanted to become stronger as quickly as possible. He never expected that Merlin would still be alive, much less that she had risen to become the foremost mage of the demon race. The girl kneeling before him is a relative of the student he once considered family. With the slave mark still present, Eftel cannot simply leave her behind. Eftel agrees to become her master temporarily in order to protect her. However, he makes it clear that they will help one another as equals rather than continue the abusive relationship she endured before. The girl introduces herself as Anastasia and begins traveling with him. Unfortunately, she continues calling Eftel master and behaves with absolute obedience. Magical chains can be destroyed in an instant, but habits carved into the mind through years of suffering cannot disappear after a single conversation. Before nightfall, Eftel and Anastasia reach the city where the Magic Academy entrance examination will soon take place. Anastasia is surprised that someone as powerful as Eftel still intends to take the same examination as ordinary applicants. Eftel offers no detailed explanation and instead searches for a place where they can eat and prepare for the following day. He eventually leads her into an expensive restaurant catering to wealthy customers. The moment they reach the table, Anastasia ignores the empty chair across from Eftel and kneels obediently at his feet. She lowers her head and trembles like someone attempting to become the perfect slave. Eftal immediately becomes uncomfortable and tells her to sit in the chair. Anastasia responds in terror that a slave must remain beneath her master and would never dare share the same table. Realizing that ordinary persuasion will not work, Eftal uses the one form of authority she currently understands. As her temporary master, he orders her to sit in the chair and enjoy the meal with him. Their progress is interrupted when an employee announces that slaves are forbidden from sitting at the tables and that the restaurant serves only members of the upper class. He also doubts that Eftal can afford the meal. Anastasia immediately apologizes and offers to eat at a street stall instead, revealing how accustomed she has become to accepting discrimination without resistance. Eftal refuses to back down. He places a valuable magic stone worth more than 500 gold coins on the table. The employee's attitude changes instantly. The man who was prepared to throw them outside now bows repeatedly, apologizes, and prepares the finest private section in the restaurant. Apparently, Wealth can perform a transformation spell faster than any mage. Eftal refuses the change and orders the finest meat available, while insisting that Anastasia continue eating beside him. Faced with a table covered in expensive dishes, she struggles to believe that someone considered a slave is even permitted to touch the food. Eftal tells her to treat the meal as a proper introduction between traveling companions, yet he is trying to change more than a body accustomed to hunger. He wants Anastasia to understand that she has the right to sit at the same table, choose what she eats, and be treated as a human being. She has lived under someone else's control for so long that she has almost forgotten how to express anger or personal preference. When Eftal asks whether there is anything she dislikes, Anastasia cannot even understand why her master would care about her feelings. Eftal seriously tells Anastasia that from now on, she must speak honestly whenever something makes her uncomfortable. Gathering every fragment of courage she possesses, she attempts to refuse him with a voice barely louder than a whisper. The moment the word leaves her mouth, she panics, drops her head, and repeatedly apologizes for disobeying. Her fear of punishment has become almost instinctive. Watching the painful yet strangely awkward scene, Eftal understands that years of conditioning cannot be erased overnight. Removing the chains inside her mind may be far more difficult than destroying the mark on her body. He decides that he will help her change gradually, one small step at a time. The next morning, Eftal buys Anastasia a new set of clothes and brings her to the Magic Academy. The bright outfit makes her look completely different from the frightened slave he met the previous day. A long line of applicants from across the region waits outside the academy gates. Anastasia assumes that she is merely accompanying Eftal, so she is stunned when he tells her to enter the examination as well. He explains that anyone has the right to apply. If she passes, learns a profession, and develops her abilities, she may eventually support herself instead of remaining dependent on another person for the rest of her life. Eftal assures her that her magical potential exceeds that of most applicants standing outside the academy. His judgment is based partly on her connection to Merlin's bloodline and partly on the enormous mana he can sense directly within her. He has not brought Anastasia to the examination because he wants a more capable servant. He is offering her the first step toward independence, allowing her to build a future of her own and finally escape the identity that has imprisoned her family for generations. The first trial at Krone Academy of Magic is announced as a survival battle. 16 applicants enter the arena in each round, and they are permitted to use magic, weapons, and virtually any method necessary. Anyone knocked off the platform is immediately eliminated, and the match continues until only 5 competitors remain. The supervisor is a B-rank adventurer who seems delighted that he can earn money simply by standing there and watching. In previous years, none of the applicants were impressive enough to hold his attention. When several candidates surround Eftal, he assumes the weakest-looking person in a chaotic battle will naturally become the first target. The prediction has barely left his mouth when the supposed prey attacks first. Eftal reinforces his legs with magic and bursts through the circle. Every kick launches another opponent out of the arena. Within moments, the surrounding candidates are lying outside the platform, while Eftal remains standing calmly in the center. The examiner quickly realizes that the situation has completely reversed. In a survival match, the person displaying the greatest strength soon becomes the common enemy. The 5 remaining applicants therefore join forces against Eftal and Anastasia. Before they can close the distance, Anastasia forms a magic circle, calls upon the wind spirits, and casts the 3rd-tier spell, Wind Spirit's Kiss. A violent pillar of air erupts across the arena, catches all 5 attackers, and throws them outside simultaneously. When the wind finally fades, only Eftal and Anastasia remain on the platform. The applicants waiting for their turns immediately realize that Anastasia's abilities are far beyond those of an ordinary candidate. The examiner struggles to hide his shock before calling forward the next group of 16. Anastasia shyly admits that she may have used slightly too much power. Eftal does not criticize her and instead confirms that she possesses exceptionally rare magical talent. What truly concerns him is that Anastasia had to recite such a long incantation before activating the spell. He asks whether chanting is actually considered mandatory in the modern era. The examiner and everyone nearby burst into laughter, assuming Eftal is so ignorant that he does not understand the most basic principle of magic. Anastasia explains that spells obviously require entire incantations. To someone who lived during the golden age of magic, however, the strange part is expecting an enemy to stand still while a mage recites an entire speech in the middle of battle. Rather than continue arguing, Eftel raises one hand to demonstrate. 4 green magic circles appear around him at the same time. 4 fourth-tier spells activate without a single spoken word. Enormous columns of wind tear through the arena, throwing everyone nearby aside and carving deep holes into the floor. The platform and surrounding walls suffer severe damage. Eftal only intended to demonstrate chantless casting and did not deliberately target anyone, but the resulting destruction will require days of repairs. Anastasia can only stare, while the examiner immediately announces that both of them have passed the first round. Allowing these two to continue fighting would probably bankrupt the school. The next challenge is a written examination held inside a massive lecture hall. Having spent his entire previous life researching magical theory, Eftal finds the material extremely simple. His only complaint is the unbelievable number of questions. Even so, he continues working from the beginning of the paper until the proctor announces that time has expired. By then, Eftal has answered everything. He complains that the exam was absurdly long, leaving Anastasia horrified. She asks whether he truly attempted every question. Only then does she explain that the examination uses a selective format. Each applicant is supposed to answer only the sections related to their own specialty. Eftal's misunderstanding produces a result that shocks the entire academy. Inside the faculty council room, the instructors stare at the score of 958, unable to believe their eyes. Since Krone Academy was founded, no candidate has ever achieved a result so high. The new record belongs to Eftel Alcott, a name identical to that of the legendary Thunder God Emperor, one of the 4 emperors. The academy's director initially suspects that Eftel cheated. At that moment, the B-rank examiner enters and reports what occurred in the arena. A 4th-tier spell alone normally represents graduate-level ability, yet Eftel activated 4 of them simultaneously without chanting. Even the academy's own instructors may not be capable of reproducing such a feat. His testimony transforms the score of 958 from suspicious evidence into proof of an existence far beyond the school's standards. Combined with the name Eftal Alcott, the director is reminded of the Thunder God Emperor and begins wondering whether the legendary mage has somehow reincarnated. On the day the results are announced, Eftel and Anastasia separate to search for their examination numbers among the crowd. Anastasia quickly finds number 588 on the special admission list. Overwhelmed with happiness, she throws her arms around Eftel in front of the entire academy. After noticing everyone staring, she turns bright red, steps away, and hurriedly apologizes. Eftel simply smiles, congratulates her, and reminds her that from this day forward, she can finally live as an ordinary student. Their happiness quickly gives way to concern when neither of them can find Eftel's number, 589, on the main board. Both his theoretical and practical results far exceeded the requirements. Eftel briefly wonders whether the academy secretly examined his magical aptitude and rejected him because of his colorless attribute. Anastasia insists that her master could never fail and prepares to file an immediate complaint. Eftal stops her, knowing that creating a scene in front of the crowd will only make the situation more uncomfortable. Fortunately, Anastasia soon notices a framed announcement displayed separately nearby. Eftal did not fail at all. His number was removed from the ordinary list because he had been admitted through an exceptional special position. He has also been appointed the chief representative of all specially admitted students. Anastasia believes the role is perfectly appropriate for someone with his results. Eftal has barely finished feeling relieved before realizing that his plan for a peaceful school life has ended before classes have even begun. The benefits are certainly generous. His tuition, dormitory, and meals are completely covered, and he will receive a salary along with additional allowances. In exchange, however, Eftal must represent Krone during public events and exchanges with other academies. That responsibility directly contradicts his goal of quietly using the library to research the limits of magical compatibility. Since the appointment has already been publicly announced, refusing it will be extremely difficult. A greater problem appears in the hallway. As Eftel passes a white-haired demon woman, he immediately recognizes Merlin, the young student who once learned magic under him and has now grown into an adult. Her appearance has changed very little from his memories. Although Eftal's current body is younger, it still carries several features resembling his previous life. He fears that Merlin may recognize the teacher who supposedly died 400 years ago. If his reincarnation is exposed on the very first day, he will immediately become trapped in endless complications. Eftel calls Anastasia and suggests exploring another part of the academy. In reality, he is conducting a quiet retreat before his former student can look directly at him. Merlin's instincts remain as sharp as ever. The moment she senses something familiar, she suddenly calls out, "Master," and begins chasing him. Merlin does not directly claim that he is the Thunder God Emperor. She only asks whether Eftel has some connection to the legendary mage. Unwilling to create a public disturbance that might threaten his enrollment, Eftel pretends not to understand. He abruptly changes the subject, tells Anastasia that he is hungry, and pulls her away for lunch. Merlin continues calling for him to stop, but Eftel refuses to turn around. At the moment, a clumsy excuse is still safer than explaining an entire life from 4 centuries ago. While they eat inside the academy grounds, Eftel asks why Anastasia failed to recognize the white-haired woman. She is shocked to learn that the woman was Merlin and admits that they have never met personally. Merlin is the daughter of the current Demon King, while an ancestor 10 generations removed from Anastasia once held the same position. Their connection is so distant that they are little more than names on the same family tree. Eftel is more puzzled by Merlin's presence at Krone. She currently serves as headmistress of Altina Academy of Magic, so there should be no reason for her to appear here. The answer is revealed during the entrance ceremony. The host introduces Merlin as an honored guest, and she steps onto the stage to congratulate the new students as they begin their pursuit of magic. Once Eftel confirms that she is not a teacher at Krone, he temporarily relaxes and plans to address her suspicions discreetly after the ceremony. Unfortunately, the host suddenly calls the chief representative of the incoming students to deliver a speech and loudly announces the name Eftel Alcott. Whispers immediately spread through the hall about the name shared with one of the 4 emperors and the unprecedented theoretical examination record. Eftel's plan to avoid attention collapses completely. He is forced to walk onto the stage beneath Merlin's direct gaze. After the ceremony, his status as the exceptional student representative continues attracting attention. A group of female students quickly surrounds him and begins introducing themselves, while Anastasia sits nearby with obvious irritation because she was the first person to follow Eftel. The crowd voluntarily disperses when Merlin approaches. She places his examination paper in front of him and unexpectedly asks whether he knows what reincarnation means. The question strikes directly at his secret, but Eftel continues pretending not to understand while studying her intentions. Merlin explains that most of Krone's instructors know his answers are correct. The problem is that none of them understand the methods used to reach those answers. Every solution on Eftel's paper is based on the magical theory system of 400 years ago. To him, it is basic knowledge. In the modern era, however, most of it has been lost. Those traces remind Merlin of her former teacher. She admits that reincarnation sounds unbelievable, yet she is certain the current Eftel has a special connection to the Thunder God Emperor. Merlin also suspects that he avoided her because the connection involves a secret he refuses to reveal. Each of her arguments moves closer to the truth. Eftel desperately wants to admit that he is the teacher she once knew, but countless students are still listening nearby. If news spreads that the Thunder God Emperor has returned, the peaceful research life he desires will disappear forever. Realizing that complete denial cannot explain the ancient knowledge in his examination, Eftel leans closer to Merlin and invents another story. He claims that the Thunder God Emperor once had a secret lover and that they produced a child with exceptional magical talent. The child secretly inherited all of his knowledge before withdrawing into the mountains with future descendants to avoid the world's attention. Merlin immediately objects that her master never mentioned any hidden family. Eftel strengthens the lie with a piece of truth. He asks whether she knows that the Thunder God Emperor possessed no natural magical aptitude and carried that regret throughout his life. The information could damage the reputation of one of the 4 emperors, so very few people ever learned it. Even Merlin must admit that secrets of that importance are often concealed. Eftel then introduces himself as the 13th generation heir of this isolated bloodline, which supposedly never interacted with wider society. The explanation accounts for his knowledge of 400-year-old theory while allowing him to avoid revealing his reincarnation. Internally, Eftel apologizes to his former student for inventing an entire family tree directly in front of her. Merlin does not expose the story, although whether she truly believes him or has merely agreed to protect his secret remains uncertain. Merlin then seriously declares that the imaginary family Eftel described is not the only one continuing the path of the Thunder God Emperor. She herself has never stopped training throughout the past 400 years. Brief memories reveal Merlin fighting, studying, and teaching magic to generation after generation, preserving the path her teacher once opened almost entirely by herself. At that moment, the reunion becomes more than a threat to Eftel's identity. Looking at the student who remains young in his memories, he realizes he missed every part of her 4-century journey. The curiosity of a magician and the concern of an old teacher gradually overpower his desire to avoid her. Eftel genuinely wants to witness how far Merlin has advanced during those centuries. Merlin mentions a mock battle scheduled for that afternoon and asks whether he plans to participate. She then directly invites him to face her in a magical duel. Eftel understands that refusing would help reduce attention and preserve his quiet school life. Accepting a challenge from Altina's headmistress, however, will undoubtedly cause the entire academy to focus on him. After a brief moment of consideration, Eftel accepts the challenge. His desire to test the results of Merlin's 400 years of training has become more important than concealing his strength. Standing behind him, Anastasia quietly smiles at his decision.